thank you very much. My topic today is, can a skeptic be pious and should he be? Now, of course, because of the focus of our conference, the historical focus, we are looking at an example from ancient skepticism, more specifically ancient Pyrrhonism. I'm not going to be spending a lot of time explaining in much detail ancient Pyrrhonism. Hopefully you have some idea, but I will give a little bit of a foundation so that you can understand the context here, why this question is interesting. Because, I mean, right from the get-go, there's something weird about the idea of a skeptic being pious. But let's see how exactly the Pyrrhonists think about this, and more importantly, why. So, the most important source of our knowledge about ancient Pyrrhonism is Sextus Empiricus, not necessarily because he was the smartest skeptic in the whole movement, but simply because we do have his works that have survived, unlike the works of other Pyrrhonian skeptics, unfortunately. So according to him, the Pyrrhonian skeptic begins his skeptical journey, if you wish, by noticing that in respect to everything, both in the context of ordinary life, as well as in the context of philosophy and science, there are mutually exclusive oppositions between various appearances and explanations. For example, the same tower appears round from a distance and then square from up close. In some cultures, adultery is considered wrong, while in others it is permissible. Some philosophers argue that the soul is immortal, others that it is mortal, and so on and so on. His writings are full with these examples of mutually exclusive ideas, appearances, beliefs about all sorts of things. That serves to establish this first step in the skeptic's journey, which is the observation, if you wish, that everything around us seems to be in some kind of dispute, in some kind of collision. After careful consideration, the skeptic realizes that all these opposing appearances and explanations are equally persuasive. Now, this is, I think, where the skeptic starts to deviate from what most other people are experiencing. And the skeptic believes, or I should say doesn't believe, but notices that he's unable to rationally decide between these alternatives, these different explanations or appearances that he is experiencing. Because of this, the skeptic suspends belief about the real nature of things. These things can be of ethical nature, can be of scientific nature. The suspension of belief here that we are talking about is universal or global, if you wish. So it covers everything. Finally, the skeptic discovers that the suspension of belief has resulted in a special state of mind. So it brings the skeptic into a special state of mind, which they called ataraxia, or tranquility, or freedom from disturbance. Now, of course, what they mean here is freedom from unavoidable disturbance, because they do not deny that the skeptics are still bothered by certain things that cannot be avoided, such as hunger, the need for sleep, thirst, and so on and so on. But when it comes to everything else that is not unavoidable, their goal is to eliminate any kind of disturbance by applying this skeptical method. So the sequence we have here is something like this: oppositions, equal persuasiveness, suspension, and then tranquility. Now, in this last thing, I guess, is where the Pyrrhonians are special compared to what you would normally consider skeptical philosophy, right? So this addition that the goal, that first of all, that skepticism has a goal, that the goal is of practical nature, and that the goal is actually tranquility or peace of mind or freedom from disturbance. And this is going to be crucial for answering our question today. Let me say a few words about ataraxia. So, since it plays such an important role, let's look at a text that describes a little bit of what ataraxia is all about. We do not take the skeptics to be undisturbed in every way. We say that they are disturbed by things which are forced upon them. For we agree that at times they shiver and they are thirsty and have other feelings of this kind. But in these cases, ordinary people are afflicted by two sets of circumstances, by the affections themselves and, no less, by believing that these circumstances are bad by nature. We can skip this paragraph. The skeptics who shed the additional belief that each of these things is bad in its nature come off more moderately than in these other, even in these cases. So in other words, the skeptic is at an advantage compared to any other person or any other philosopher of some competing school in that they, by applying this method, they manage to eliminate all unnecessary troubles that beliefs in the true nature of things can cause in their mind, in their soul. Now, let's look at their views about piety. In Book 1 of his work, Outlines of Pyrrhonism, Sextus provides a general account of how the skeptics are supposed to conduct their lives. This is what he says. Holding to that which appears, we live without beliefs, in accordance with the observations pertaining to life. For we are incapable of being completely inactive. These observations pertaining to life seem to be fourfold, consisting in the guidance of nature, the necessitation of affections, tradition of laws and customs, and in the instruction in crafts. Now, what's most important for us here is this point where Sextus tells us that the skeptics follow laws and customs of their society. So in accordance with the tradition of customs and laws, we receive from life the view of piety as good and impiety as bad. The second text, close to the beginning of Book 3, which deals with the views of dogmatic philosophers, meaning everybody else, on physics and ethics, Sextus says the following. Since the majority of philosophers have asserted that God is the most active cause, let us first investigate views about God, remarking by way of preface that, following life in manner devoid of beliefs, we say that there are gods and we are pious towards the gods. And we say that they are provident, while it is against the rashness of the dogmatists that we make the following points. And then he goes on to, dismantle, in his view at least, or as they would say today in these YouTube videos, to debunk everybody else. But the point in this paragraph is that the skeptic will say, in a manner devoid of beliefs, whatever that is, that there are gods and that the skeptics are pious towards gods. And the final text, and against the physicists, Sextus tackles the arguments of the dogmatists on gods in more detail, and then he makes the following conclusion. Since not everything that is conceived also shares in reality, but something can be conceived but not be real, like the Hippocentaur or Scylla, it will be necessary after our investigation of the conception of the gods to inquire also into their reality. For perhaps the skeptic will be found to be safer than those who do philosophy in another way, in line with his ancestral customs and laws. He says that there are gods and does everything that tends to worship of and reverence towards them. But as far as philosophical investigation is concerned, the skeptic makes no rash moves. Of those who have inquired into the reality of God, then, some say that there is a God, some that there is not a God, and some that there no more is than is not. Most of the dogmatists and the common preconception of life say that there is God. Those labeled atheists say that there is not. And the skeptics say that there is no more than there are not gods, because of the equal strength of the opposing arguments for and against the existence of gods. So here's the situation that we have. On the one hand, the skeptics insist that they don't believe in the existence of gods. But on the other hand, they say that the skeptic is pious, or should be pious, and that the skeptic should say, if somebody asks them, what do you think, is there God? Yes, of course, gods exist. Why? It seems like a very schizophrenic situation. So, if he truly suspends belief about everything, we would expect the skeptic to be either disinterested in this whole business about religion, or at least to be equally disposed both towards and against the idea of obeying gods, respecting them, and so on. But that's not what we find in the texts, as we have seen. So there is a problem there, or at least it appears to be. So I have two questions here that I want to try to answer. The first one is, can the skeptic do this without betraying his skepticism? Can he be pious? In some sense, whatever that sense is. And the second, why would he want to do this? So even if the skeptic can be pious, what's the reason? What's the motivation? So to answer the first question, I want to propose, rather straightforwardly, that it is perfectly possible for one to engage in pious behavior and pious practices without holding any pious beliefs, any beliefs about God, religion, and so on. This may sound a little bit strange, maybe, but when I give you a couple of examples, I think many of you will actually see that this is actually not such a big deal. Can one, for example, say Merry Christmas, or attend a Mass, or sign in a church, sing in a church choir without believing that God exists? Some of you have probably done it. So it seems that the answer is yes. Just like one can, for instance, be faithful to his wife without holding the belief that adultery is morally wrong. I guess that's also possible. I'm referring back to Sextus' example with customs and laws that are not really related to religion. So I see no reason to think that saying pious things or even acting piously necessarily presupposes holding beliefs with pious content. Now, I underline this because this sort of behavior might actually presuppose certain other beliefs of different content, but I'm not going to go into that because the focus now is on beliefs about God, respecting gods, believing in providence, and so on. Even if there are other beliefs that are required here, they would not really be related to this particular issue. So let's move on to the second question, which is, I think, much more interesting. Why would the skeptic want to act piously? This part of the problem is not only more interesting, but I think a little bit more difficult to understand here. We have seen that the skeptic's ultimate aim is ataraxia, freedom from disturbance, being mentally tranquil by anything or untroubled by anything except the unavoidable necessary things. Now, Sextus never explicitly says that the purpose of this pious behavior of the skeptic is related to ataraxia, but I think that is actually the direction where we should be trying to discover or to solve the puzzle of this motivation. Namely, saying that gods exist and engaging in religious rituals observed by the community in which he lives could actually help the skeptic avoid unnecessary disturbances and achieve and maintain his ataraxia. So let's look at a little bit of a more concrete and specific examples how being pious might actually help the skeptic maintain his peace of mind. Now first, I do not mean here only the external disturbances that may arise from disregarding religious customs, like for example being ostracized by your community or persecuted because you're not going to church or something like that. The skeptics didn't really seem to be bothered much by this. I primarily mean eliminating the effect of holding beliefs that may be involved in actively avoiding pious behavior that is common in his community. Namely, recall that the skeptic acquiesces to things that arise from his life's experience. If he has been brought up in a culture in which most people believe that gods exist, and in which most people actively display this belief through religious rituals, he would be predisposed, habituated, even trained, you may say, to behave in the similar way. Because remember, the skeptic is not born from the little baby as a skeptic. It really doesn't really happen like that. It's somebody who later in their life, if ever, becomes a skeptic. So there's a whole portion of the skeptic's life where he is just sort of brought up like any normal person within a particular social context. And if that context is religious, then he will probably be involved in that or immersed in that culture in which he was born. Now, breaking these habits, going against this training, would arguably require believing that there are strong reasons to do so. And these are precisely the sorts of beliefs that can unnecessarily upset the skeptic and jeopardize his ataraxia. So essentially, if you're born in a community that is religious and you were sort of you're used to that kind of behavior, thinking, and so on, in order to break with that, you need extra effort. You need reasons to say, okay, now this is all wrong and I'm not going to do that anymore. Now that actually is the step which goes beyond what the skeptics are prepared to allow for themselves. That's actually more disturbing than actually just going along with the motions of whatever the situation you're brought up in. Consider the following example. If I've been brought up from childhood in a Christian family that places great care and effort in organizing a celebratory family dinner each Christmas or Easter, deciding to break this ritual that I've grown accustomed to over the years would require me to accept and act on a belief to the effect that since I find reasons for the existence and non-existence of Christian God to be of equal strength, I should no longer participate in these festivities. On the contrary, it seems that passively continuing to participate and going through all the motions, even though I suspend my belief in the existence or non-existence of the Christian God, would be more in accordance with my skeptical indifference than taking active steps to disengage from the established practice. So the motivation for the skeptic to act piously in this context of a pious community is the fact that it contributes to his ataraxia more than acting impiously. That's the essence of my claim or my argument. And just sort of by way of ending this on a more controversial note, I guess, I want to address one potential objection here, namely the objection from conformism. Because if the skeptic's method leads him to always obey the existing laws and customs of his community, even when they are, for whatever reason, problematic, then isn't he merely a conformist, just a pathetic yes-man? Now, I think that this objection, or this implication that is embedded in this objection, is actually valid. It can hardly be denied. The skeptic's approach, which takes ataraxia as the only ultimate goal, life goal, does indeed make him a staunch anti-reformist and anti-revolutionary. Not just when it comes to religion, but everything else, ethics, politics, you name it. However, the Pyrrhonian skeptic is perfectly content with this. That much is clear from Sextus's writings. It's as though he tells us, if I am a conformist, so what? I am still much better off than being a reformist or a revolutionary in terms of the peace of my mind, right? So it doesn't really matter. He sort of bites the bullet there. But I think there still might be something to this objection. In his effort to avoid all unnecessary mental disturbances and attain and maintain mental tranquility, the skeptic does rid himself of the potential pleasures and excitements experienced by reformists or revolutionaries. And insofar as there may be some important value in these, I'm not saying that there is, but if there is, then the skeptic is indeed pitifully deprived of these. However, if this is the case, the issue here would not be a matter of the skeptic's inconsistency, but rather of his perhaps misguided choice of the ultimate goal of his life, which is ataraxia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk, and I hope there will be a question.
Thank you very much for your enlightening presentation. I like Pyrrhonism, and I would like to know, okay, if we take it in this way, that atheist in ancient culture was a person who believed that God or gods exist, but didn't pay attention to them. We can say that Pyrrhonists were atheists in this regard. And do you really think that it was something particular to Pyrrhonists to act like that, that in conformity with the culture where they lived, which was pious, they were pious as well, because this was done by everyone. Cicero did not believe in pagan gods, but he worshipped, he observed some things, some practices. So would it be really something special for Pyrrhonists? Or is it that they said to themselves, maybe, okay, gods exist, don't exist, but it's better to worship them somehow or not? Thank you.
Right, thank you for the question. So, first of all, Cicero was not a Pyrrhonist. He was a skeptic of some sort, more an academic skeptic, but then again, there's different sort of levels of academic skepticism, and perhaps Cicero is perhaps, it's not entirely clear, but of the lighter kind, right? So Carneades and then his followers, more than Arcesilaus, who was a little bit more radical. Now, perhaps the Epicureans are the most, extreme example, I think, of philosophers in this period who show more or less open disregard for the traditional religion, yes. Even though they also believe there are some sort of gods, completely different from what the masses think. But then again, the Stoics also had a completely different idea of gods than the normal people. And they were much more conservative and much more conformist. Now, is this something special that the skeptics are doing? I think it is a little bit, because it seems to me that the other philosophers who also didn't really buy into the folk religion, but still didn't really openly show disrespect, they did it either because they didn't really care much, or because they just wanted to be safer on the practical level, not persecuted, not, burned at the stake or something like that. Right, but I think that what's unique perhaps for Pyrrhonists, if my interpretation is correct, is that it actually is the integral part of their philosophical system or teaching, if you wish. They don't do it just because they want to stay safe, but they do it because it actually contributes to their philosophical goal. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how it seems to me. Thank you. Thank you.